How to live longer by doing this one thing. You know, it's not often you get to say something so simplistic, so simply, that it sounds like it's extreme exaggeration. It's almost a paradox. But if you follow this one lab, you'll get a lot of benefits for the rest of your life. It's pretty straightforward, but it's been something that's pretty much been ripped open in those last, you could say 30 or 40 years, but I'll say actually the last 2 or 3. It's getting to be more and more the dominant sort of cutting edge conversation to have. And we're going to explore it all today. So how to live longer by doing this one thing. These people wish they knew what you're about to know. And so let's see if you recognize some of these names. Beethoven, Charles Dickens, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Sir Isaac Newton, Nostradamus, Leonardo da Vinci, Queen Victoria, Alexander the Great, John Calvin, Charlemagne, Christopher Columbus, Karl Marx, Michelangelo. I could say Henry VIII, by the way, or Thomas Jefferson, or John Adams. So what am I talking about? You need to know your uric acid levels. It will save your life. They used to think that it was such a minor test that they just included it in all your lab panels. And the range was, people were within normal range unless they were really had a problem, really had hyperuricemia, elevated uric acid. But for most part, people would just say, your doctor would say, hey, you're within normal range, that's fine. This has been completely changed, given a lot of granular research over the last 4 decades maybe, and certainly the last 5 or 6 years, as you'll see. And so this is something that's now causative, whereas before they thought it was like a sign of something else happening. This is, in other words, the culprit for a lot of diseases has been right front and center in the labs. And so if you want to reduce your chance of obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, cognitive impairment, time to pay attention. It's elevated uric acid really so bad. Look at all the things it's related to. Insulin resistance and diabetes, visceral adiposity, belly fat, blood pressure, hypertension, renal disease, endothelial dysfunction. What that means is clogging up your arteries, oxidative stress, burning out, inflammation, cardiovascular disease. So in short, yes, absolutely. Interesting topic. Interesting article I found. Every man a king. Henry VIII's worst affliction is on the rise in America. And so this is back in 2012. So that's back 10 years ago. The classic thinking is that the rise in obesity itself may be responsible for the rise in uric acid. But epidemiological studies show that the rise in uric acid precedes the development of obesity and diabetes. Therefore, it is likely that there are other reasons uric acid is increasing in our population. Our studies suggest, remember this is 10 years ago, our studies suggest this is driven in part by the intake of sugar and high fructose corn syrup. He said, the person where this article is written about, its researches also suggest uric acid may have a role in causing hypertension, elevated blood pressure, and insulin resistance, diabetes. And there's a reference for that. Fascinating article, by the way. What do beer drinkers, chickens, crocodiles, and orangutans have in common? Well, for some evolutionary reason, humans, birds, reptiles, and great apes lack a liver enzyme called uricase. Not my case, uricase, in which it breaks down and regulates uric acid. ACE means it's an enzyme that breaks things down. So ura breaks down uric acid, it's uricase. A normal waste product of purines found in many foods, such as shellfish, organ meats, brewer's yeast, and hops, essential ingredients for beer, and also high in purines. Well, clearly this is a popular topic. Look at all these. These are just thumbnails from various YouTubes that I scarfed up, and most of these people I'm familiar with. So you have Dr. Perlmutter over here a couple times. He's come out with his book, Acid Drop. His whole thing is writing a book on high fructose corn syrup and how it's the new bane of our existence. And that's true. I think it's a little oversimplified. And as we'll get into, particularly my story, fructose has nothing to do with anything to do with me. But if you're on the standard American diet, it clearly has something to do with you. So whether it's fruit juices, whether it's sodas that you're having, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, whatever your brand is, all these things. Over here, You have some quick offers, some quick cures. You have, here's nettles, tea, magnesium, vitamin C, celery juice, and of course fish oil. And they're not wrong. They're kind of being a rather superficial, getting your attention for a superficial coverage. And that's just the way it is. Can it happen? Then he's Thomas DeLauer talking about gout, lower uric acid levels before and after having more coffee. That's partially true. Diet doctor, low carb lovers, uric acid, lower uric acid. What causes gout? The truth for what causes gout? Okay then. And detox uric acid. We're going to get into this, and I think it's important to know the bigger picture. So this is not going to be a superficial presentation. This is going to be, if anything, perhaps a little bit too deep. They're not wrong for the most part, just omitted some important facts in my view. So the problem is that it's not that simple for most of us. Here's where the story changes from what has been told over the last 5,000 years, from the very first known documented case of gout, which is due to elevated uric acid, we'll get into that, to what we know today. So where does uric acid come from? Well, the reality is this, is either you make too much or you can't get rid of it enough, right? Because we don't have uricase, we got to get rid of it. So the kidneys are a big deal to us right here in this particular situation. Get rid of it. So most of it uric acid gets processed 70% through the liver and about 30% through the gut. It really does come down to mostly the liver. And so the liver makes it water soluble to an extent. It's not very soluble stuff, by the way, uric acid. And it sends it out in the urine, which goes to the kidneys to be filtered. Okay, that's pretty much the story. Well, part of it does go back through bile and into the gut and goes out through the stool. But for the most part, when people have a problem with gout, it's a kidney problem. Either they're not being able to excrete all that they're making. So what we're told now today, which is actually true in terms of just looking production versus excretion, it's not a production. It's not like we're eating too much and so on and so forth. There's a little bit of that. That is a variable, but it's clearly not what we thought it was before. But 90% is compromised excretion, hyperuricemia. We're keeping it in. We're not letting it out. That's the problem. So in terms of production, what does that mean? Well, you produce it by what you eat, what your body makes, and we'll get into a few other factors. In terms of the high purine content of your food, it's meat, and you can argue about what meat is worse. There's a lot of different lists, but we'll just call it meat. With certain organ meats in particular. So that would be liver for the most part. I'm a liver lover. That's a problem. There's kidney. There's other organs. Most people don't eat enough liver, in my view, and they certainly don't have much in the way of kidney and so on and so forth. So seafood, shrimps, tuna, mackerel, sardines, beer. Isn't that interesting? Yep, it came from the yeast, which I just told you about. Purines. Risk factors, male, age, obesity. It is predominantly a male, though at postmenopausal, women have a big uptick in terms of gout incidence, diabetes, insulin resistance, heart disease. It was previously thought that it was all about what you ate. It's on you, buddy. You got to change your diet in order to change your situation, change your gout. The only motivation you ever had before was gout. You didn't know if uric acid was higher or not. It wasn't something that was discovered or articulated, but it was just like your foot hurts, your knee hurts, your fingers hurt. What are you going to do about it? It's your diet. So clearly we're going to talk about diet, but it's way bigger than your diet. So in one way, I'm taking a little responsibility off your shoulders if this is what you're interested in. So it's not 100% what we eat. Okay, where does uric acid come from? Exogenous dietary proteins, which is what you eat, play a significantly smaller role than had been previously thought for a very long time, like thousands of years, right? Endogenous dietary purines from your metabolism is really the big picture. A diet rich in purine also increases serum uric acid, which is what we measure in a lab test. We're going to talk about that, no doubt. But dietary purines only make up 1 to 2 milligrams per deciliter, that's a unit that we measure, of your serum UA, a very small proportion of the total load. For this reason, the one-sided focus on dietary purines alone has proved insufficient to manage gout. In other words, you can tell people to change their diet and it really isn't going to change things. Although purine diet is still the foundation, they still have to do their part, but there's other things they need to be aware of. The dietary therapy for hyperuricemia and gout is diet, even though it's rather insignificant. Okay, so back in 1896, there was a guy named Alexander Haig, and he's the first one that came up with the low purine diet. That's the punchline. But look what was the title of his book. Uric acid. Uric acid was just discovered, that is in terms of identified, really in the late 1700s, and we're still trying to figure out what it was. But he said a factor in the causation of disease. And he goes, pathology of high arterial tension, hypertension, headaches, still hypertension, epilepsy, mental depression, hemoglobin, paroxysmal hemoglobin, anemia, Bright's disease, diabetes, gout. He was pretty right on. So it's over 100 years ago, and he pretty much nailed it. Okay, but his diet was incredibly hard to be on, and it didn't last very long. It wasn't as bad as fasting, but all the fun foods were taken out. So his book, Uric Acid, went through 7 editions, 1890s to the 1900s. Haig's uric acid free diet required elimination of every food containing high amounts of purines that could be metabolized into uric acid. On this diet, all meats and many vegetables were eliminated. And what did that leave? It grew more extreme over time. His original diet included eggs, fruit, and fish, but were later omitted. Oops. Haig advised people to live on breadstuffs, milk, cheese, and vegetables. Well, it's something. The objective was to reduce purines down to 0. So he believed it was 100% of what you eat, and we're just going to muscle you down, your diet, your metabolism down into 0 purine, and you're going to be fine. So global cases of gout have now exceeded 41 million. It's a big number probably to you, don't know where that stands, with an alarming rate of increase in 2021. The long and short of it is, over the last 40 years, it's almost quadrupled. This is kind of the general picture of don't eat this is good. And you'll see this reproduced. And there's a lot of very similar lists. There's not like this finite list. But just know over here, the big arrow increases risk, down, decrease, and that's neutral. Let's go over here. Multiple vitamins, it says, and vitamin C, decrease risk. That's a good thing. Coffee decreases risk. Tea is neutral. Sweetened soda, obviously bad. Alcohol in moderation unless contraindicated. Wine was neutral, beer was doubly bad, and liquor was bad. And then that's pretty much how we think of it now. I'll show you a study later in which it says all alcohol is bad. There's some discretionary choices apparently. Dairy or calcium supplement, 1 to 2 servings. Low-fat dairy products, not high-fat, low-fat dairy products. Increase fish, even though seafood's on the list, increase fish, poultry, and eggs to 2 servings. Nuts and legumes, 1 to 3 servings. That's neutrals, nut and legumes. Vegetables, neutral. Fruits could be potentially bad, so watch them. Whole grain foods, most meals. So cereals, in this context, it's the opposite of what Carl talks about, what Dr. Goldkamp talks about. This is just the opposite. It's have dairy, have whole grains. I'm explaining their perspective here. So this has become the standard recommendation by most health practitioners. This is what your doctor will give you, probably exactly, or their own typed out sheet. So the basic truth behind it all, but it's incomplete. Food intake and cell breakdown or metabolism, cell turnover, metabolism creates purines. So this big pool of purines gets transformed by the liver into uric acid. And so you either have a lot of that happening, overproduction, or you have an undersecretion. We're talking about what you can measure in the serum, right? You're boxing it in. So if it's undersecreted, like if you're dehydrated, you're not urinating and everything else, it's just increasing the concentration of uric acid. So little things can make a big deal. So hyperuricemia goes to the kidneys, of course, but also just because we're measuring it in the serum, this is really important, it leaks in, it diffuses in, however you want to look at it, into your soft tissues. And this whole idea that's into soft tissues throughout your body, it's kind of a new idea because of, look at this, other tissues and ear. I'm going to show you later how hyperuricemia, elevated uric acid, is actually related to loss of hearing as you get older. Well, probably younger. They haven't measured a lot of young people, but it's related to loss of hearing. This is one of the soft tissues, starts to accumulate in. So between gout and hearing loss, doesn't look good. Studies have shown that there is a correlation between gout and increased risk of hearing loss. One study involved researchers that analyzed 5% of all Medicare claims from 2006 to 2010. That's a lot of Medicare claims. So this included 1.7 million people ages 65 and over. By the end of the study, about 90,000 people developed hearing loss. Compared rates of hearing loss among patients with gout and patients without gout. The key findings were people with gout had a higher rate of hearing loss. So gout was kind of the easy thing to cull people out of, right? They didn't know all these people. You don't know uric acid in all these people. But when people have gout, they raise their hand. I have gout. I need, and it's on their medical records. So people with gout had a higher rate of hearing loss. Gout was associated with a 44% increase in the risk of developing hearing loss. In other words, about 50% of everybody with gout over 65 had hearing loss, some degree of hearing loss. Amazing. And that was in 2022. That is new. Okay, psoriasis and elevated uric acid. This was new to me, and I'll tell you my story later. Hyperuricemia in patients with psoriasis. In this study, and this study is down in 2021, the prevalence of asymptomatic elevated uric acid, hyperuricemia, was approximately twice as high in psoriatic patients than in controls matched. Psoriasis, which these two pictures are, and the reason I showed elbows is because that's one of the popular places, common places for psoriasis to first show up. So psoriasis was significantly a positive predictor. So if people got psoriasis first and they had kind of normal, within range, we'll say, uric acid, this is going to predict that they're on the list, it's going to start climbing. So it was a predictor. And looking for things that are a predictor of things to come are great, because now you can treat something before it becomes a really big issue. So to date, convincing evidence has indicated that psoriasis is independently associated with hyperuricemia. Where gout comes from. This is I'm going to give you 3 different layers of how our thinking's evolved, but I want you to see this circle and how we're going to give a few more pieces to it, right? So where gout comes from. Everything in this circle has to do with producing uric acid. But when we started, we thought it was all from your diet, right? 100% from your diet. Purines weren't identified until 1884, and in the late 1700s, I think it's 1774, that's when gout was first actually given a name, and that's where they actually identified uric acid, but they didn't put these things together back then. So it was all about your diet. It was the Ben Franklin, the Thomas Jefferson, the Henry VIII image that they drank a lot of port, they drank had a lot of alcohol, they had a lot of meats, cured meats, maybe they had seafood, but I think it's the alcohol and the cured meats and all the things that they could have that other people didn't have. Think alcohol. Do you hear the alcohol part? So basically they see it as 2 parts. So this is how we saw it since the very first case of gout that we can go back and say it's documented 2,640 years before BC. Okay, well that evolved a little bit. Where uric acid, once we got uric acid, we're connected with purines. Now we have 3 different areas. We're keeping alcohol there because that's been from the very beginning, and we'll get a little deeper in that. But your diet, meat and seafood primarily, is now a smaller portion. This whole other aspect is your metabolism. In other words, if you didn't eat seafood or meats, those high purine foods, you would still have serum uric acid. It wouldn't be elevated. Maybe you would have brought it into, but most of it, notice it's more than half, most of it is cellular turnover. It's happening anyway. You have a uric acid number. So 0 was impractical to have a low purine diet by Alexander Haig, but you could drop it somewhat. This is how we thought about it through the 1900s. Okay, where purines come from. Now we're starting to ask some better questions. We've broken it down into 3 areas, right? Your metabolism, which is primarily the liver, we're talking about that. It's your diet, which is a sliver, but it's important, and you have to take care of it. It's your responsibility. But the other is, you can say, well, alcohol and now fructose or fructose is your responsibility. It obviously comes through the mouth. This is true. So you can almost push it into the diet part. But what I'm saying here is these are, in essence, kind of a toxin on the liver. And the liver quickly has to make a lot of purines to break down these toxins. And we'll get into these. And there's other toxins, of course. Okay, where purines come from, 3 areas. What you make from your metabolism, what you consume in your diet, so endogenous, exogenous, a purine-rich diet. But the toxins now are fructose, high fructose corn syrup, high fructose sucrose, alcohol, we have different kinds of alcohol, environmental toxins like lead that create purines that increase your uric acid. They create purines because your liver has to create the purines to detoxify these particular toxins. Factors that create uric acid level. The largest portion, this is a summary, larger portion is your metabolism. It's your metabolism. So it's not all your fault. It's not all your diet. It's dietary purines only make up 1 to 2 milligrams per deciliter, a small portion. The ranges are you want to be under 7, you want to be under 6, men or women, but we'll say for the time being it's about 6. So that's under 30%. That's 15 to 30%. The body constantly replaces damaged tissue and dead cells, and the breakdown of their proteins or purines leads to the formation of significant amounts of uric acid. The newer story you're being told today is, however, uric acid overproduction comes from fructose. That is, the majority of gout sufferers are because they're having soft drinks, because they're having energy drinks, because they have a lot of sugar in their diet. I would say that's partially true. It's not a lie, and it's not exactly lying by omission, but it's oversimplification. And I'll say personally, I'm not a fructose guy. I don't have any high fructose corn syrup. I don't have much in the way of fruits. Probably could have more. But so my situation has nothing to do with fructose. And there's plenty of people that are ketovore, carnivore that suddenly have had gout. They never had gout before, and they're clearly not a fructose person. So what's going on? And that's what I want to tease out here in this particular talk. Most people overproduce uric acid when their fructose intake exceeds the critical amount. In other words, exceeds the capacity of the liver to take care of it, to break it down. And that is what happened when we lost the enzyme uricase. If we had the enzyme uricase, we could just shovel it out the back end, right? It doesn't matter. Goes to uric acid just like out with urine, out with the stool. But no, that's not the case. The critical amount is, and that's how they refer to it in a lot of studies, is the amount that the liver can handle or detoxify to break down into a water-soluble or fat-soluble toxin that can be taken out of the body. Okay, enter evolution. 4 changes that benefited us then, but not really working for us too well today, given our diet. What worked for us well 14 million years ago is having the opposite effect right now. Go back. We fucked everything up. I guess you could say that. Okay, 3 mutations that changed humans forever. 1, we lost the ability to break down uric acid, no longer have the enzyme uricase. Humans, birds, reptiles, and great apes. We gained the ability to convert fructose to glucose. That's a good thing, right? Because glucose is the thing that really is our primary fuel. We've talked about ketones before, and that's our fallback when we're fasting and so on, and that's our fat burning, you bet. But glucose is the emergency fuel. We always want to have glucose around. So important that we even keep it as glycogen. We have glucose in the form of glycogen in our muscles and in our liver. It's all throughout the body, secreted away, if you will. So when that emergency shows up, we got it in a second. Okay, gained the ability to break down alcohol to acetic acid, vinegar. Now it's a water soluble. We got rid of that. In limited, it's another limitation here, in limited quantities. And if you go back even further in time, we lost the ability to convert glucose to vitamin C. Before, we could have had all the vitamin C we wanted. You know, it was just glucose, vitamin C, glucose. So we also lost the ability to do that. Primates, guinea pigs, and fruit bats. All right, so the short list of what we talked about of high purine foods are meats, organ meats, seafoods, meat extracts and gravies, yeast and yeast extracts, yep, like beer. That's why beer is so problematic. Beer and other alcoholic beverages, beans, peas, lentils, oatmeal, spinach, asparagus, cauliflower, and mushrooms. They're on the top of the veggies. They are far less offenders than the meats, by the way. Low purine foods are refined cereals, cereal products such as cornflakes, white bread, pasta, all the things you'd never eat. Milk, milk products, and eggs. They don't specify if it's yolks or the protein. Sugar, sweets, butter, polyunsaturated margarine. Seriously. Don't be doing that. All right, in reality, it's difficult to know the accurate purine content of any food. That's 1996. Okay, dietary prescriptions for gout and high uric acid. Obviously, avoid the organ meats, drinks with fructose, corn syrup, alcohol overuse, especially with attack of gout. Limit seafoods, sweetened fruit juices, and you encourage dairy products and veggies. That's pretty much the back of the napkin approach to dealing with gout. And that's the sliver of the diet. So that's what you tell people. There's your responsibility. We've got to work on other things. If that doesn't work, they're more than happy to give you a number of medications that are toxic, but may be necessary to get you out of pain. A more comprehensive list of foods that will increase your uric acid. This is from 2018. Just look at the yellows are the ones that are good. Here we go. Skim milk, not other forms. Skim milk and cheese. What else? What you want to get is beyond the blue. The blue line is significance. In other words, if it's beyond the blue line, the data means it's authentic and it is helpful. So cheese, and there's a lot of cheeses, I'm sure that varies. Skim milk, less so non-citrus fruits, brown bread, cold cereal, peanuts, eggs. So you've heard about the eggs, right? So at least the eggs are in the good column. Okay, so vitamin C intake and serum uric acid. This was Boston University back in 2008. And what they basically showed you is the more vitamin C you took, right? 500, 1,000, that's a milligram and a half, 2 milligrams, and it drops the incidence. And so they had a large population that they worked with. So it drops pretty quickly, and you don't need this, according to this, shows that you don't need a lot of vitamin C. However, what would have been interesting to see is that who was, what were the levels of vitamin C before they started? Because there's probably some people here who had remarkable vitamin C experience. And by the way, this is prudent data here because it doesn't say go nuts on vitamin C. So if you're troubled with gout or you have elevated uric acid, don't keep shoveling down the vitamin C. You want to have an adequate enough of vitamin C. So 500 milligrams is basically nothing. I now take 1,000 a day of vitamin C. So it is a player, it's just not a panacea here. Okay, seriously, fruit. This is basically how much fructose, and we'll start from the bottom, in a banana. 6 grams of fructose, 14 of sugar. Now we're up to an apple. 19 grams of sugar, 10 grams of fructose. Now we're up to an orange. 9 grams of sugar, so it's actually the least offending in terms of sugar, and not so bad in terms of fructose. And then tomato, not much sugar, some sugar of course, and hardly anything in the way of fructose. And here's another way of looking at it. Here's a ratio of fruits and how much fructose they have and how much glucose they have. So we'll go to the bottom of the list. So the highest concentration fruit of fructose to glucose is a pear. The lowest is a banana, which we just said. And so if you go into, let's say, watermelon is a lot of fructose and very little glucose. The secret list of factors most people don't know about that increase uric acid. And this could be a presentation in itself, but what I want to show you is that there is a difference between men and women relative to uric acid, and it's for a number of reasons. Testosterone being for one, we'll get to that in a second, but muscle mass is one. Muscle mass. So if people who really do have muscle, I'm not talking about obesity, they're big people. I'm talking about muscle mass. They actually have large muscle. So as you increase your muscle mass, your uric acid level should rise proportionally. And if you work out intensely, you will get a rise in uric acid due to all the muscle you broke down. So all that muscle breakdown, you've increased the cellular turnover, right? Now you've broken down even more in addition to the rest of the metabolic. So we can put that in the metabolic column, right? This has nothing to do with diet. So there you go. So now we've sort of increased it. And people always ask about protein powders. I think that if you are on, if you're thinking about gout or you have elevated uric acid, I really wouldn't be taking protein powders because they're concentrated protein and they're just going to magnify the problem and bring you up by a couple milligrams, I'm sure. The other one, which is very smart or not smart, depending on how you want to look at it, is eating too much protein at any one time. We're going to delve into that. In other words, you eat protein throughout the day. You don't go, I have my protein meal. That's not smart. If you don't have a uric acid problem, don't worry about it. You can do whatever you want to do. But if you do, then you have to partition and you have to pay attention to this. And this is what I mean. This comes back from a number of other videos we do. This is for men, for women. So your ideal body weight, not what you should use. This is a reference for how much protein you need to have per day. So for instance, I'm the 5'10" guy, right? So I need 162 my ideal body weight, which I do not weigh, is 162 pounds. That means I have 1 gram, I like this number, it's 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight. So 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Okay, so there we go. 162 grams of protein I have in the course of my whole day. How I break that up is going to be significant. But what if I want to have protein be the instigator of muscle protein synthesis, then I should have at least 30 grams, right? 30 grams, and I've talked about this in other videos, put the link for that up here. 30 grams of protein, of whole food sources of protein, whatever that is, at least 30 grams, in itself will stimulate muscle protein synthesis, okay? Less than that, it will not. So some people, they don't want to have 4 servings of protein per day. They want to have an OMAD, which is a stupid way of eating protein because your body needs it throughout the day. So what happens when you have protein that's far beyond this? So you have 100 grams of protein beyond your 30. What happens to that? That's not a good thing. Basically, either gets broken down, maybe stored as fat, possibly it goes into, or more than likely, it goes into creating increase in uric acid. So it is an issue. So be thinking, if you have a uric acid problem, to partition your protein eating times as advocated here 4 times a day. So what does that look like? So this is just a calculation. I'm going through this quickly because I've talked about this before. 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight. What you can do is break it up into 4. 160 divided by 4 is 40. So 44 times a day, or 31 and a little more later on, but not all at once. Okay, this is what we're talking about, and this comes from the research of Dr. Stu Phillips up at Hamilton in Ontario, and just wonderful stuff. And I stole it from one of his presentations, basically saying, just on the eating of protein will increase our muscle protein synthesis, that's this part, and decrease our muscle protein breakdown. And if we add exercise to that, any kind of exercise, but high intensity exercise, you put a demand on it, you will really increase. You'll be able to hypertrophy your muscle. So in this context, and this is addressing sarcopenia as people getting older, is exactly what they need. But if you're a real muscle guy and a gym rat, you already got your muscles and you're doing more of this, you're probably coming very close. And it's not uncommon for bodybuilders to have uric acid problems. The reason they have uric acid problem is they got the testosterone up, they got the muscle mass up, and they have the workout intensity up. So these are things that sort of need to be balanced out. Hate to interrupt, but I wanted to say that I'm having to cut this in half because it's a very long presentation. It's perhaps the most important presentation I've made about uric acid and about health in general. And the reason I'm sort of putting so much time and effort and focus and passion into this is because of what I can't do elsewhere in my life. I wish I could reach the people that are close to me to say, could you do these things? It would make a big difference. And I realized that's not my place. And I don't want to sort of say I'm just the information guy. But what I'm trying to encourage you to do is to look into this and take it on face value for what I'm saying. Do something about this, and it will serve you well for decades in the future, depending on how old you are or how young you are. Please take this seriously. And that's why I'm breaking this into 2 parts. So you don't go to sleep in part 1 and forget about what I was talking about. And this is very important to me. So if there was one video, watch this. Part 2 coming out tomorrow. Bye-bye. So if this is something that you're interested in, that is a topic that I obviously go deeper in terms of labs, in terms of how to do it, in terms of why you would want to do it, various topics, as you've seen that I've done in the past, then please let me know below in a comment. Till then.